Hi, I'm Nick with AutoTechNick, and today we're going to be talking about one of the secrets behind the performance of a Ferrari. So one of the main big differences on a Ferrari versus most of your standard road-going cars is for the majority of the model lineup, they all run off of a dry sump oiling system. Meaning we have an external oil tank and that houses all of the oil in the car versus it sitting in the oil pan. It extends from there because it's not just limited to the location of the oil. We have multiple oil pumps in the engine. So we have our traditional pressure pump that is pressurizing the entire engine with all of its oil, but we will have other additional pumps on the back side of that, which we reference as scavenging pumps. Now, depending on the configuration and the car, you could have one scavenge pump, you can have 5, 6, 7. Really, you can add more of them. The purpose of those scavenging pumps is to scavenge and suck as much oil out of the engine as they can and get it back into this oil tank. Now, some of the benefits that you're gonna see from a dry sump oiling system is the scavenge pumps. They run the crankcase under a vacuum, and that allows your ring package to be a lot lighter and promotes better ring sealing, which ultimately is gonna give you more power. Now, one of the major or main benefits of the dry sump oil system is really about oil control. So we have less oil sitting in the oil pan, there's less windage. We don't have to worry about foaming up and whipping up the oil during spirited driving, but also it really comes down to the storage of the oil. So on our oil tank, on the bottom here is our feed line coming into our pressure pump. And as you can see, it's at the very bottom of our oil tank, which is very tall and skinny. Now this car is filled up with about 8 liters of oil, so by the time it's full of oil, our oil level is approximately set at about this level. You'll notice in the area where the oil sits, where our pickup is at, it has a very small cross section, meaning when the car is being driven spiritedly and a lot of high G-forces in corners, there's less chance that that oil is going to slosh and allow air to get into our oil pickup. So the dry sump's really going to enable us to have much better oil control and ensure that the car always has a constant supply of oil. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind with the dry sump oil system. That even gets down to as basic as an oil change. Now, when we're doing an oil change on these cars, there is a sequence that I like to perform, and I always drain the oil tank first. I don't drain the sump of the engine. I do so because the oil tank does have a feed into the engine, and it can backflow oil into the engine. So depending on the temperature of the oil and the configuration of your system, if I were to drain the engine oil out of the pan or the sump, put my drain plug back in, if maybe I went to lunch, came back an hour later, and then drained my oil tank, the oil tank's actually gonna backflow oil back into the engine and start to fill that cavity back up, meaning I would actually miss a couple quarts of oil and not get everything out of the engine. As a matter of fact, when I drained the oil from this car, I had let it sat for over a week. And when I drained the oil tank, I had far less than a quart come out of it. When I drained the sump of the engine, all of my oil came out. So it was a perfect example where I let the car sit long enough and I actually drained everything out of the oil tank. So when you're doing the oil changes on these cars, you're gonna wanna drain the oil tank first. Once that's drained, then you go and drain your sump. I've seen some cars that actually have up to 3 drains on the oil sump in different locations, so you have to drain all of those drain plugs as well. Another thing to keep in mind on the dry sump oiling system is our oil level. You actually set your oil level here with this dipstick that's attached to our fill plug. And like every dipstick we're all used to seeing, we have a minimum mark and a maximum mark. Very unique on dry sump oil systems, we actually set the oil level with the oil at full temperature back to this cross-sectional area. It's such a small cross-sectional area. As we heat that oil up, it will tend to expand. So if I set this oil level to the minimum mark and I actually run the car and get the oil hot, my oil will visibly travel up the dipstick and actually be close to the maximum mark. We want the oil set on the minimum mark with oil that's fully up to temperature. That's counterintuitive to a wet sump system because on a wet sump, you always set it to maximum. You also check the oil with the engine off. The dry sump, the engine's running. Now, our reasoning or theory behind setting it to the minimum mark kind of comes back again to the small cross section. We don't need the same amount of oil in the oil tank to ensure that our oil pickup always has its constant supply of oil as opposed to a wet sump. In addition, we have breather lines at the top of this oil tank right here that feed into the intake track of the engine. If we overfill the oil in this car, we can start to aerate it, we can whip it up, and we can even have enough vacuum in the engine where it's gonna pull oil from the oil tank through these breather lines. It can go through the airflow meters, ruin your airflow meters, and obviously you don't want any oil in the intake track of the engine. So the steps that we take to set the oil level are counterintuitive and a little bit opposite of a wet sump, but it is unique to the cars, and I would say that setting the oil level is one thing that I actually see done incorrectly. Very frequently they're set overfilled, very rarely do they come in underfilled. Most people always assume to set them to the full mark, and they're unaware of the consequences of it being too full. The reason why you don't see dry sump oiling system on most production cars is for a multitude of reasons. One of them is packaging. You can see that this engine still has a traditional oil pan on the bottom, although it's a bit shallower, but then they have to find a position and location for this sizable oil tank, which you can see is actually pretty large. Another reason why you don't see them is the expense. You still have your oil pumps. Depending on the amount of stages, you have more oil pumps in the engine. You can see that we have this oil tank that's here that they have to manufacture in place, and also all of the oil lines that are attached to it. In addition, what you can't see here and which are left in the car is there's actually an oil cooler that has more lines that bolt to the side of this tank, and there's an entire oil cooler set off to the side. So it's for those reasons why you don't see these on most traditional cars. Ferraris are built for the ultimate performance with no compromise, no sacrifice. So Ferrari went through the effort, the engineer, and designed these into the car. So what I have sitting on the bench here is half of the dry sump oil pump off of a V12. Now the front section's already removed, which is the pressure pump for the engine, which is a vane type pump, but you can clearly see on this pump that it has right here showing 3 stages. So it's essentially 3 oil pumps stacked upon one another. That's where I was referencing that you can have multiple stages. And most of the Ferrari dry sump oil pumps are external. This is an external pump where you can see that this is the suction side where it would bolt to the oil pan, and these are the return sides where they're going to bolt back up to the block of the engine. But this is a great item to use to demonstrate. You can see that this is a gear style pump or a rotary pump. And if I pull off that first stage oil pump here, you can see that that comes off, and it's essentially the exact same thing to where we can just continue to stack as many of these scavenging pumps as they need in order to achieve the vacuum and the oil control they want in the engine. But you can tell by stages, they're just referencing the quantity of scavenge pumps. And obviously there's a little bit of engineering designed into it on what this is scavenging the oil from and where it's returning it to. Now, one interesting thing about the 355 that we were talking about is it is a dry sump oil system, but all of the oil pumps are actually still inside the oil pan, more like a conventional car with a wet sump oil system. So if you want to learn more about maximizing the performance of your engine, dry sump oil systems, the high performance powertrain class, that WyoTech is the one for you. If you guys liked what we covered in today's video, be sure to like and subscribe to the WyoTech channel. And if you want to see more behind the scenes footage, be sure to follow me over on AutoTechNick.